On behalf of the People's Progressive Party, I have great pleasure in welcoming you to this afternoon's discussion that aims to create awareness and understanding of a particular topic that has gripped our society for a very, very long time. This topic is one that we call corruption. In general terms, corruption is the abuse of power for private gain. Transparency International states that corruption can be classified as grand, petty, and political, depending on the amounts of money lost and the sector where it comes from. Grand corruption consists of acts committed at a high level of government that distort policies or the central functioning of the state, enabling leaders to benefit at the expense of the public good. Petty corruption refers to everyday abuse of entrusted power by low and middle level public officials in their interactions with ordinary citizens, who often are trying to access basic goods or services in places like hospitals, schools, police departments, and other agencies. Political corruption is a manipulation of policies, institutions, and rules of procedure in the allocation of resources and financing by political decision makers, who abuse their position to sustain their power, status, and wealth. This evening, you will all benefit from a healthy dose of information that allows you to understand corruption and clarify how and where it is occurring and by whom. Every day of our lives, the PPP and its leaders are bombarded by accusations of corruption, and to date, it is yet to be proven, even though millions were spent on something we call the forensic audit. Forensic audit is not a bad thing, but when used selectively, it becomes a terrible thing because it means that power is abused with an ulterior motive. One section of the society is led to believe that every single person who worked with the PPP were thieves. And this theory is sprayed upon by those with ulterior motives. On the other hand, another section of the society believes that we now have thieves in the government. And more so, when a forensic audit is done, it should be done across board. Therefore, maybe some believe City Hall needs to have a forensic audit too. My friends, comrades, at our head table this afternoon, you will be hearing from Anil Nandalal, former Attorney General and member of the People's Progressive Party Executive and Central Committee. Bishop Juan Ejil, former Minister within the Ministry of Finance, now a Member of Parliament, just like the former Attorney General. Our very own Clement Rohi, General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party, former Minister of Government and present Member of Parliament. And our own very beloved Dr. Bara Jagdeo, former President and now Opposition Leader. I have the pleasure of inviting Bishop Ejil to come and share his thoughts on this very, very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, colleagues of the head table, former President and former Prime Minister Samuel Hines, distinguished ladies and gentlemen in the audience, ladies and gentlemen of the media. I am very pleased to be able to share in this forum this afternoon on this very topical issue of corruption. And I don't want to stand here and just repeat what would have already been known publicly, especially more recently the 25 scandals outlined by the PPPC's Chief Whip, Madam Teixeira, the members of the media. 25 scandals in 16 months. But I want to speak to something that perhaps is more fundamental. And I want to offer my perspective on the very nature of this government. The very nature of the government. Not just their actions, but who they are. Because oftentimes we can hear statements like, it was a mistake, we are not angels. So it's human to err. But when we are discussing this very important issue of corruption, we're not just talking here about actions that are misdeeds or misacts. We're talking about the very nature of the APNU plus AFC government. Their despicable behavior, and I would even want to say their brazen approach, because it is quite a brazen approach, things that they should be ashamed of and to be embarrassed about, and should be really giving them a difficult time. With a very smooth face, in a sanctimonious manner, they could face the public and say, everything is fine, there is nothing wrong with this. From my standpoint and my belief, I would want to share a biblical quote. Jesus had this to say about the Pharisees and the scribes. He described them as whitened sepulchres with dead men's bones, nicely painted tombs, but rottenness in the inside. And I couldn't think of a more appropriate phrase to describe what we are seeing in our country today as it relates to corruption. And I just want to highlight something. We have been talking about nepotism that exists today. At this forum this afternoon, I want to put out a challenge to members of the government, including ministers of the government, to deny that in their offices and in their secretariats, they don't have very close family members and relatives who are working for them. Everybody has a right to work. I believe in that. But when the question was asked in Parliament about the expanding of contracted employees and the process in which these employees came, a specific question was asked. Did you advertise for these positions? And you know what was the answer that was given? We got the best people for the job. Did you advertise? What was the form of advertising? So there was no public advertising. And the first form of corruption that we could put at the table of the APNU plus AFC is their employment practices and nepotism that exists throughout the entire administration. The second thing that I want to bring to our attention has to do with the cronyism. You know, there's been a lot of talk about the military and the military types that are being given jobs. And even Mr. Granger came out in defense of saying that these people should get work. But I want to remind us, and all of us who saw it throughout the length and breadth of Guyana, it's no secret that I'm speaking this afternoon. It was the ex-military people that form the core of the electoral machinery and operations apparatus for the election of David Granger to power. So they have to be rewarded by these jobs that they're getting. And it is nothing short of corruption where it could be described as cronyism. We also have to look at some other important things that needs to be observed. While the APNU AFC was in opposition, we had in place, the PPPC government had in place what was called the Integrity Commission. I'm sure everybody knew about the Integrity Commission. Every year, yours truly, like many others, we had to file our returns with the Integrity Commission. And we did that dutifully. As a matter of fact, it was mandatory. The presidents ensured that the ministers and their MPs filed because we upheld the law. It was the then leader of the opposition who filed a court action to attack what was happening at the Integrity Commission. And the then members of the opposition did not file their returns to the Integrity Commission. But we are told that they would like to have a society that is free of corruption. Well, let me give you the latest news. There is no Integrity Commission in place after 16 months. And besides that, the secretariat that remained in place was given marching orders with 48 hours notice to pack up and move out of its office, and it's now relocated in a small space at the Ethnic Relations Commission building. So not only did they not appoint commissioners where people could be able to supervise the work of the commission, but the very secretariat that remained is now crippled and becoming ineffective. You could now see it in the newspapers. The Integrity Commission is giving notice to people that they're now located at the building of in Peter Road. So the Integrity Commission is one of the strongest anti-corruption mechanisms that exists in our law. And you would recall that it was the PPPC that took a motion to Parliament that called for all MPs to make public their disclosure to the Ethnic Relations Commission and make public their tax returns. Even the former president, Dr. Barajabio, said he was prepared, even though as a president he was not required to file, he was prepared to make public his declarations to the integrity,
You have to file.
the taxes. As president, he filed to the Integrity Commission, and he was even though he didn't have to file taxes. At the Integrity Commission, he was prepared to make his declaration public. They voted the motion down. They voted the motion down. But I want to say that I would believe, and if you talk to the common man in the street, one of the first acts of corruption that has still annoyed the Guyanese people is what took place very early in the life of this government, the salary increase. And it's still biting in the ground. And comrades, it wasn't just about the salary, because oftentimes that is lost. What I'm about to say, they fixed their pensions for life. That's what they did with the salary increase. It wasn't just about the salary. And you remember before, everywhere across the country, in the headlines in the Kaieteur News, it was about Jagdio's pension. Jagdio's pension was the issue. But let me tell you, What will take place now? And I've confirmed this because, you know, when you give figures these days, people jump around and keep noise. A minister in the government today who's been a member of parliament for 12 years or more will get 7/8 of his salary for the rest of his life as pension. So you just check out the Prime Minister's pension who was criticizing Barajagdio's pension. Check out Ramjatan's pension. You can just imagine that. It wasn't just about the salary. It was about fixing their pensions for the rest of their life. The final thing that I would want to address has to do with this whole issue of procurement, because time is of the essence, and public procurement. I've written a letter that was published in the dailies that spoke to the fact that when we came into power in 1992, there was nothing like public procurement legislation that is in place. It is the PPP that put in place public procurement legislation. But what I saw quite recently in the newspaper is a very laughable excuse of one of the reasons why the president has not sworn in the Public Procurement Commission, even though the PAC was able to get agreement that went to the floor that got a 2/3 vote, is that they are waiting on the PAC to approve the terms of reference. Well, colleagues, go back to the Constitution. The terms of reference for the PPP, the Public Procurement Commission, is already in the Constitution. No terms of reference has to be written. So the question is, why they're not enacting the Public Procurement Commission? I went back and I checked. The day before elections in 2015, the Sunday papers, Dr. Clive Thomas, who was born in 1935, had an article about procurement fraud and what it is costing this country. Well, I would have thought that with all of those views and how they base PPPC, that we would have seen a change in public procurement practices. But if you notice in this week's Chronicle, I think it was 2 days ago, the PNC is having a workshop for contractors. And then in the same newspapers, the Minister of Public Infrastructure is announcing that contracts are being held for last lap work. What's last lap work? You know what's last lap work? Money that didn't spend all year, that they have to spend now before the next budget. They're trying now to get these small contractors organized, registered, and put in place to hand out work without even advertising, which will be done through sole sourcing. I would like them to refute that. So colleagues, when we talk about corruption, as I bring my brief presentation to a close, we have to look at the very nature and how this administration is operating and what they're doing. It's not just singular acts. It's not just singular acts. And permit me to say this. The first day that we attended Parliament and the President addressed the House, no, we didn't attend, the President addressed the House. He made a solemn promise that he will not prorogue Parliament. He was actually saying that he will not use his presidential discretionary powers in such a way. But this afternoon he used his presidential discretionary powers by suspending Carville Duncan as chairman of the Public Service Commission while there is a tribunal that is set up that should not have been set up in the first place, because there is a court hearing that is taking place, and the president, who's supposed to be the high altar in the ivory tower, has gone and he has used his presidential powers discretionary powers to suspend a constitutional office holder. Having had a meeting with the man, asking him to resign, which should have never taken place in the first instance. Because no president has the right to call an independent constitutional office holder and say, I want your resignation, I want blood on my carpet. That is the nature, and that is what's taking place. If we can't get you one way, we will manufacture reasons, we will create avenues to get what we want to achieve, and that in itself is corruption. Thank you very much.
With my busy schedule, managing that time of the month could be very challenging. With Protex cotton surface pads, I'm dry and clean for 10 hours. With Protex, I feel relaxed and confident with their absorption, leak lock protection, odor control, and thermal technology. Protex, the protection, care, and comfort you can always depend on. Take advantage of the extra savings with 10 extra panty liners when you purchase 1-pack Protex pads. Be sure to ask for Protex pads. Enjoy the comfort and savings. Distributed by Superfoods. Call 223-1034 or 223-1035.
Thank you, Bishop. And you would have heard the Bishop focusing his discussion on nepotism, cronyism, and the use of executive power to achieve objectives rather than allow democracy to be nurtured and to grow. The second speaker this afternoon is no other than Anil Nandalal, former Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. He also holds positions in the People's Progressive Party Central Committee and Executive Committee, and he is a Member of Parliament. Comrade Anil.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, General Secretary, Bishop Ejil, former Prime Minister, members of Parliament, colleagues of mine, comrades and friends, it's a pleasure to be here to speak to you on the question of corruption. But it is really impossible to deal with such a vast concept in the time allotted, because one can speak on so many issues, so many measures that were introduced by the PPP civic government from 1992 to now, which never existed before and changed permanently the landscape of this country in terms of accountability and transparency. One can first cite the fact that for 10 successive years, from 1982, from 1982 or 1980 until about 1992, there was no Auditor General report done in this country. If you say that now, it sounds like heresy. But that is what happened. Not a single cent of public funds was ever accounted for nearly 12 years in this country. For nearly 12 years. Anand Gulsaran, today a champion of transparency and accountability, held the office of Auditor General of this country for several years under the PNC, and he flagrantly violated his constitutional obligations to put before the National Assembly an auditor report, or Auditor General report. So monies were being spent left, right, and center in this country, contracts being awarded, and you and I, and no one knew what was the basis, who those contractors were, what monies were used, how many tax were collected, nothing. We were blinded in this country. There was a huge vacuum when it came to public finances, the spending of public finances. We changed that from the very first year that we took office. And in 1993 to 2015, every single year, an Auditor General report was presented to the National Assembly and sent to the Public Accounts Committee, which we resuscitated, by the way, because that was a dead committee under the PNC, which we resuscitated, and that committee is being chaired by the opposition and has always been chaired by the opposition, and they reviewed that Auditor General report every single year, and many of the front page articles that you would have seen published in the newspapers about scandals and about non-transparency and lack of accountability came from the Auditor General report, which we made possible in this country after the absence of nearly 12 years. And that alone is perhaps the most signal accomplishment in terms of accountability and transparency. But we didn't leave it there. We removed the Auditor General office from central government, where it was located, as a department of the Ministry of Finance, and we made it a substantive constitutional office, and we imbued its employees. We removed them from being public servants, and we made them employees of that unit, and gave the Auditor General and the employees security of tenure, so that no government minister or political officer could have interfered with them in terms of influencing the way they were conducting their business. We separated away from central government and made it a constitutional independent unit, as secured as the judiciary is. So now to remove the Auditor General, one has to go through a process similar as if you want to remove a judge. That's the kind of protection we gave through the Auditor General's office. So not only did we bring back the report, but we strengthened the office institutionally. Secondly, disposal of assets. In Guyana, under the PNC, there was absolutely no policy, no framework, no system by which divestments were done and state assets were sold. None at all. And that is why, if you check the records, you will see companies like Alisi Group of Companies purchasing several rice mills in this country, hundreds of thousands of acres of land, wharf facilities in Essequibo, rice mills from Quarantine to Leguan, without a single public advertisement done. Nobody knew that the assets were for sale. No competitive process embarked upon to determine market value for those assets. And you know who signed the agreements of sale? The confidential secretary to then President Hart. That is what existed in this country. You have the Pandey family buying prime real estate in this country on Water Street, in New Amsterdam, in Bel Air Park, the Guyana Stores bond. Nobody ever knew that those properties were for sale. No other Guyanese were given any preference, any opportunity to bid. But these guys were on a committee called Committee for the Re-election of President White, and Tulsi Prasad similarly got a huge expanse of land next to JP Santos at a next to nothing price. Got another block of land at Turkine, no public bidding, no advertisement, nothing. State assets were simply gifted away. Viola Barnum got 500 acres, Forbes Barnum took half a bell bag, and Belfield, and I can go on to give you examples. They just took lands as if it was theirs, and nobody knew anything about it. When we came to power, when our government came to office, we laid a white paper in the parliament. And in that white paper, we set out a procedure that we will follow if we are to dispose of state assets and if we are going to divest. And that white paper enjoyed the unanimous support of the opposition at the time. And we committed to a few principles. One, public advertisement. Two, market value. And three, to change that if the situation warranted. And we follow that slavishly in relation to every single asset disposed of. We identified a centralized agency to do the same, NISIL. And NISIL accounts were audited every year by the Auditor General. And we committed to that process. And NISIL has listed in a document made public all the properties that it sold from 1994 to about 2015. And the price is there, who purchased it, when the advertisement was placed in the newspapers, etc., etc. So we did that. Then you hear a lot of things about the lotto funds and extra budgetary funds. We have been criticized for about 20 years about depositing money in a fund called a lotto fund and depositing money in certain extra budgetary funds. But the law says that is where the money should go. The Constitution says that all public funds should go into the consolidated funds, save and except if a law says otherwise. And the Lotto Act tells you that the lotto money must go into a fund. And that fund, of course, is audited. The same thing for the GGMC, the same thing for the Lands and Surveys Commission, and every other statutory agency. Today, they are doing the identical thing. I asked Finance Minister Winston Jordan during the 2015 debate, why is he not transferring billions of dollars that are in those funds that he criticized us for? Why is he not transferring them in the consolidated fund? And up to now, they have not answered the question, and the monies are still there. And I can go on to deal with a whole set of other issues. And if you want to hear about corruption under them, you are going to look at the court cases where they have settled and written off BVL alone. The opposition leader quotes the figure at some 60 to 80 billion. Rhodesia, they paid 1.2 million US when they didn't have to pay. But the information out there is, I don't know how accurate it is, Rhodesia supplied the flags for their campaign and gave them that car, the Kia motor car that many of them are driving. And today you see that same company winning a bid, although it came in the highest, in a pre-qualifying bid, restricted tendering, over and above Topco, an international juice company that produces beverages for PepsiCo, etc. And you would have seen what I've written about that. So, as I said, it is impossible to speak expansively and really adequately on all these matters of corruption. And that is why I think the opposition leader said that we should arrange a whole symposium lasting about 2 days, because on any given of these topics, on any given one of them, all of us here can speak about 2 hours on any given project and defend every single project done by our government, every single one. The Marriott, the Hydro project, the specialty hospital, the airport contract, any one of them, we can speak for about 2 hours before any qualified audience, I don't care who they are, and answer every conceivable question that can be posed to us. And we intend to do that in due course. But I will ask them to, just any contract that they have entered into that is controversial, we have compiled 25. Take the bond issue, let them come and answer on the bond issue. We are prepared to defend our record. Any 10 transactions if the press wants, list it, and we are prepared to defend it. You choose which transaction you want. And let them, we will choose 2, just 2 for them, and let them come and defend it. And they can't. They can't. But I suppose, we did terrible PR work when we had dedicated news agencies and newspapers against us. And they just pumped false information into people's minds, and it actually had an impact. It had an impact. But we commit here this afternoon that every single project which they have stigmatized as a corrupt one, before the next year or so, we will hold a symposium where we will dissect every single one to your satisfaction and to the satisfaction of any critical grouping of people. Thank you very much.
Eat fresh at Subs and Salads today. Over 12 tasty sub sandwiches to choose from. All the favorite fillings and toppings you can possibly think of. Made fresh every day. Personalize yours today. Our footlongs are a treat. More meat, more toppings on a well-baked bun. Our Caesar salads are amazing with the best ranch dressings. So let your next stop be Subs and Salads on Sheriff Street, Regent Street and Grove on the east bank of Demerara. Subs and Salads. Eat fresh.
Thank you very much, Commander. Corruption has a cost. It costs the lives. How? Economically, corruption depletes national wealth. Corrupt politicians invest scarce public resources in projects that will line their pockets rather than benefit communities, and prioritize high-profile projects such as dams, power plants, pipelines, refineries, and other projects which we, the PPP civic government, had on the front burner, and they have changed it to suit themselves. I would like to recognize that economic costs, for example, the almost $1 billion that was spent to create the Jubilee Park. What is that? What use is that to you or me or the Guyanese people? The bond that they spend $13 million per month to pay for that is not in use. And the write-off that Commander Anil alluded to of the DDL tax debt. This is what corruption does. At this point in time, I'd like to invite to the podium the General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party, Comrade Clement Rohi, former Minister of Home Affairs, and he will also have a mouthful to share with you.
Thank you, Comrade. I'm also very pleased to be associated with this activity. I believe that the APNU AFC is probably surprised that we were bold enough to organize an activity of this type. But I simply want to say that what we're witnessing now in terms of corruption by this administration is simply a continuation of what took place in the past under the PNC. Because we know as a fact that under the People's National Congress government from 68 to 92, there were tons upon tons of corruption exercises. So much so that many of the ministers, some of the ministers who were associated with those acts of corruption had to be posted overseas. So I'm saying to you that what we are witnessing now, today, in today's context, in terms of corruption, is basically a continuation of what took place under the PNC, now in the guise of the APNU AFC, because they're the dominant partner in this organization, in this new coalition. And they have found themselves in a situation where, while they were in the opposition, they swallowed hook, line, and sinker what was being churned out to them by the Kaichonos and the Saboteurs. They believed it. Many of it, of course, today have proven not to be true. And having believed that propaganda which was being churned out, of course, was anti-PPP, anti-PPP civic government, propaganda. Now that they're in the government, they have to appear to be doing something about what they once believed. And then you have likes like David Hines and Takuma Ogonsaye, who are the intellectuals behind the government, telling the government that, look, if Granger and company does not do anything about what they said would have been done when they were in the opposition, then many of their followers would leave them. That's what they're being told by the intellectual individuals such as David Hines and so forth. This forum, I believe, is one that is organized for us to hear more from you. We'd like to hear from you, your views on the question of corruption. Because we have spoken over and over again about this matter. The mother of all corruption in this country, within this present day situation, started on May 16, 2015. The biggest corrupt exercise that was ever committed on this country was in the last election. Because corruption does not have only to do with money, where money goes and where money is hidden or so forth, or who benefits from it. Corruption has to do with corrupt practices. And when they say corrupt practices, they speak about corrupt practices in all forms, shades, and fashions. So in my view, the biggest corrupt exercise that was committed on this nation was in the last election when they stole votes that were to come to the PPP and cheated us out of those votes. What bigger corrupt exercise could they have done? And it was from there that everything flowed. All the other corrupt practices that we're seeing now started with the election of this new government. Or not election, but with the government stealing votes to assume office. The context in which corruption is taking place in this country, we have to situate this discussion on corruption within a political context, within an economic context. Because we cannot see it in isolation from the nature of the government. What kind of government do we have? Who is it made up of? What are their background? And so the political and economic context in which this government is operating has to be taken into account. Because in many parts of the world, you have governments who have been elected by the people through fair and free elections. People in good standing. People without the kind of skeletons in the cupboards which this government has in terms of many of its ministers. And they run clean government. But in the case of Guyana, when you look at the background, when you look at the historical antecedents of the PNC and many of those who make up the current administration, you cannot but doubt that they by nature have to be engaged in corrupt practices. And this is precisely what has been happening in Guyana. And it will continue to happen unless people begin to speak out that this is what these forums are all about. To enable those who have come here to express a view. To let us hear your view. Because even though we're in the opposition today, some sections of the media continue with the rhetoric, continue with the stereotyping, in respect to the PPPC administration and many of the leaders of the PPPC administration. What we are witnessing, ladies and gentlemen, is a kind of psychological war. They're waging a psychological war on the population of this country. Talking about so many audits that have to be done. All the results of the audits have been published. And all we're hearing is that the audit was at once at the office of the presidency or the ministry of the presidency. Then they went to Ramjatan. Then they went to the commissioner of police. Then they're back with Ramjatan. They're all over the place. Why are they not being able to take action? Because obviously nothing has been found, but yet they're using this situation of threats, victimization, intimidation, and fear in order to make people believe. And then, of course, they set up of Soku and Sarah, which we've had forums about to discuss with the nation on how the government intends to go about dealing with these matters. So, my own view on this question of corruption, it's a political football. It's a political football that is being used by the current administration to see how much political points they can score in order to make the PPP look bad, even though we're not in the government, we're in the opposition. And then to try as much as possible to make them look clean, that they are not involved, but every day they're constantly being exposed and everybody's speaking out against what they do. We hope that this forum will contribute to the discussion and the debate on this question. We need to continue the discussion and the debate. You must consider this as the beginning of a discussion and a debate on all the issues that we've been discussing here, whether it's on SARA, whether it's on the City Council, whether it's on this, and many others are likely to come. But we have to see the connection between all these discussions that we've been having in this hall and in other places. They're all interconnected, and they're all painting a picture of what is happening in the country in relation to Granger's administration and what the people out there are talking about. How they see the government, how they view the government. And our role as a political party to constantly keep exposing, both in Parliament and outside of Parliament, all that is taking place in this country. Thank you.
Superfoods brings quality dairy to your home. The highest protein and the creamiest taste with calcium and vitamins A, D, and E. Keep your family smiling with our full cream Milko milk powder made from 100% pasteurized milk. Our Milko milk powder is high-quality Fonterra milk powder, now available in smaller packages. Enjoy the high quality and great taste. Call Superfoods, located at 8 Rumfeld Industrial Estate. Call 223-1034 or 223-1035.
Thank you, Comrade GS. Corruption corrodes the social fabric of society. It destroys democracy. It removes scarce funds from urgent infrastructure such as hospitals that needed medications and roads that the People's Progressive Party started to build that is no longer being built. Monies that were there for these projects are no longer there. These are questions that are emerging in our society. It destroys the fair market and competition, which in turn deters investment. Corruption is a very, very big issue that, as Comrade Anil said, we cannot discuss these topics in a couple minutes, but we will have to take days to do that at a specific seminar where you can interact more. At this point in time, we have someone with an invaluable amount of knowledge being at the helm of Guyana. I was traveling only last week with a taxi, and I don't know if the person recognized me. but the person said, he has to be jailed. And I said, oh yes, why? Can you tell me some of the reasons? And he started to outline and said, what about bringing Guyana out of the abyss of poverty and turn it into one of the fastest developing countries in this hemisphere? What about changing the socio-economic landscape of Guyana, where people could live with some dignity? What about him giving over, under his presidency, over 100,000 house lots giving to Guyanese people? Ordinary Guyanese people who never dreamt that they would probably own a home. Should he be jailed for negotiating with the bank and give him small loans at very minimal interest to build a home and feel happy about that? Oh, I don't know all of that. I said, well, my dear, before you give your mouth liberty, you should be praising one of the greatest sons of this soil, one that is respected at home and internationally, and every time he steps onto a forum overseas, he brings glory to this land. I now have the pleasure of inviting to this podium Dr. Barrett Jagger.
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to welcome you all here this evening. We appreciate your presence. Most of you would wonder why we chose this topic. And would it not be much of the same? Would it not be the PPP being in office, practicing a whole series of corrupt acts, and now, since they're out of office, coming here to criticize ACNU when they do not have the moral authority to do so? Many people may ask that question. In fact, our fiercest critics have been saying this. And they're saying this largely, maybe with some justification in their own heads, because they have worked assiduously over the years to create a perception, a view of the PPP that we had grown to become a corrupt organism, that we had departed from Chedi Jagan's legacy, and that somehow all that mattered for the PPP in office was no longer the development of the country, but people scrambling to fill their own pockets. And so this view has been repeated and has come to characterize many of our leaders over time. It's actively peddled. So a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, I was asked by the Kaishore News a question on privatization. And I said to them at that time that long before the next elections are held, we will dismantle that perception. Because I think people today, having witnessed this government and the iniquitous behavior of this government in such a short period, that they are prepared now to listen. And that's all we ask, that you listen with an open mind, not clouded by the propaganda of the past, not clouded by that tainted perception of people who were hostile to us, and so everything that they did could not, often was not the reality, but was contrived, was designed for a political purpose. So we are asking, we think people are in the mood to listen now to our explanations. Explanations that we often gave when we were in government, but fell on deaf ears because they were drowned out by the clamor and the pile-on of several of the newspapers who were hostile to us, the media resources, and opposition. So today, that's all we require from you, to listen. And as Nandalal said, we will have several seminars where we will take a single project at a time, and we'll put it up and spend 30 minutes on the project as to how it was tendered, who did the evaluation, the award of the contract, why the decisions were made to award the contract in a particular way, and then allow people to ask questions of us so they can, in their own heads after, decide whether we had gone through a fair process. So this afternoon, I want you to examine comparatively the periods that we had been in office. APNU was in office for 28 years in the post-independence era. And in 1992, we took office. What people have not paid attention to is the changes we made to the financial or the accountability architecture of Guyana. Because you can talk about individual acts of corruption, but if a country does not fix the framework within which public resources are collected and expended, then you cannot have a sustainable battle against corruption. And so here are just a few of the architectural changes we made in Guyana in terms of public accountability. We introduced program budgeting. Critical, we don't get credit for it, but it means that every cent in a program budgeting scenario has to be accounted for. We automated the accounting functions and the treasury functions in the Ministry of Finance. Now, we heard from Kaichor News and the others that of the 7 modules we had in the IFMAS system, 1 was not activated. What they didn't say is that we introduced IFMAS and we activated all or 6 of the 7 modules, and we had difficulties in activating the last one. But it was introduced, automating the functions. Nandalal spoke about the several features, the constitutional changes that we made to create an independent audit office. The reporting relationship changed. From that through the Minister of Finance to the Parliament, that's how the audit office operated pre the new constitution, and then when we passed the new constitution, we made them report directly to the Parliament. The Revenue Authority itself was another feature that we introduced. Now, many people don't know the reasoning why, but you recall the days, in the early days, when we found someone corrupt at customs, we catch someone red-handed. Yesterday, Asghar and I were talking about it. I'm glad he's here. And we caught several customs officers who were stealing. And we wrote the Public Service Commission, trying to get them just suspended. And 6 months would pass, and the Public Service Commission will not even suspend the people and they're caught red-handed. And so you had to ensure that you had greater accountability in revenue collection. You had to make that agency semi-autonomous, reporting to a board. And and literally 30, 40 people were fired, caught, hired, and they had more control over the staff at that time. The Integrity Commission Act was brought into force under us. We then had the privatization white paper. I've just listed 7 of the things, 7 new features that by themselves don't seem a lot, but when combined will significantly modernize the architecture of public accountability in how we collected resources, how we expended resources, and how we disposed of resources, public resources. But when you combine all of these, the architecture of accountability, public accountability, with the changes that we made in modernizing the financial architecture of the country, which was separate to that of the architecture of accountability, you will see how much we have changed the country, because we moved from the government accountability to public accountability. So we introduced a new Companies Act, which brought more democracy and greater rights to shareholders, so it was broadening accountability. We introduced new insurance legislation. We passed new legislation to govern the stock exchange. We brought in the Financial Institutions Act to better regulate the banking system to make people's savings better. We put in, we brought a new central act, government act, the Central Bank Act into being, and we prohibited the central bank from financing the fiscal deficit. We put in a clause there so that if government could not raise revenue could not finance its activity by revenue or by loans, then it just had to cut the expenditure because the central bank could not print money and, for that purpose. We then passed the anti-money laundering bill. I can list about 10 others. The point I'm making, none of these things we've gotten credit for. And so earlier this week or last week I was abroad and I saw Edgehill's letter to the Starbuck News saying, how is it that you're giving credit to APNU for putting in the bid protest committee and you can't give us credit for passing comprehensive procurement law, which the country never had pre-1992, comprehensive procurement law. I know that because I went to Washington. I got the best technical people to work on that law. It's one of the most modern pieces of legislation. If you disaggregate it and see the features there, you would see that many developed countries can't match, don't have that sort of framework for public procurement. But how come we can't get the credit for that? Perhaps putting new law in place when in the 28 years under the PNC, they never had procurement law. All the procurement that took place in 28 years were done under an SC letter and 4 pages of regulations. No law. And they don't dispute this. And so how come we don't get the credit for that? How come we don't get the credit for taking the cabinet out of the award of contracts? How come we don't get credit for giving contractors the right of appeal? You're giving them now credit for appointing something, a feature, or activating a feature under the law that we passed, that we had activated in the past. They forget it too. So, this is the reality. My point is that people never listen sometimes. And so the first thing is the People's Progressive Party comparatively changed the entire framework of accountability. Let me give you an example why the results of it. The international community only gave Guyana the project support. They were very reluctant in the early days. They would give balance of payment support, project support, And when they gave budgetary support, they made sure that it was for debt servicing, etc. Countries that had made sustained improvement in their accountability then were the only ones that were given budget support rather than project support, because it meant they were satisfied that you were spending the resources well. And the European Union moved from project support to budgetary support. We were one of the few countries because of these changes to our procurement system. And do not underestimate what Nandalal said about the audit report. Even if there are acts of corruption in that audit report, who allowed the audit report to be done? APNU could have allowed it. 10 years of not allowing the report. That was a tool for us, because it's not an indictment of the PPP that the audit report showed corruption. It is a tool because we allow the Auditor General to function so that he could expose the corruption and take it to the Parliament. It was a tool that was unavailable in the past. So that's the first point I wish to make about architecture. The second point about dismantling things, we must start systematically, and as Nandalal said, we will do so. But let's take a few that are most egregious, that have been most prominent in the campaign against us. So the first one is they had a pylon system. APNU would say something, then you would have these so-called transparency advocates come and say the same thing. Then you'd have the academics, Clive Thomas, coming and say something, and then the cultural news makes it into a story. So the first thing is, you recall the whole campaign, we stole $110 billion. They had an ad running that ministers of the PPP are now worth $110 billion. But most importantly, Clive Thomas and Gulsaran wrote, and this has been repeated by APNU, that every year there is $28 billion of procurement fraud under the PPP. So it meant every time we tendered, we are stealing $28 billion a year. I've been asking, they've been in office, since they're clean, very clean, you know, that sounds almost like Trump, very clean, you know? They're very, very clean. They must have saved the $28 billion that we were stealing per annum. So where is this reflected now? It should be reflected either in more civil works, but we're not seeing that, or it should be reflected in lower budgeting or budgetary expenditure. So they should have been budgeting $28 billion less to get the same benefit that we're getting. But you notice that has been swept under the carpet by all these civil society advocates who were saying it, and by the APNU and the others. Nobody wants to answer that now. So I want you to ask the media that is here, to ask Clive Thomas and Gulsaran that how much of the 28, and Granger and Ramjatan, how much of the $28 billion that they accuse the PPP of stealing through procurement fraud every single year, that was so prominent in the past, how much of it is being saved and how? That's the first question they should ask. The second one is, we heard that we were friends with vagabonds, and that there was 15, up to last week, it was repeated, that every week we export, smuggled out of the country under the PPP, 15,000 ounces of gold. So this is a clean government, very clean. So one assumes they're not smuggling anything out of the country. Zero, it has gone to zero. So what does that mean? 15,000 ounces multiplied by per week, multiplied by 52, gives you 780,000 ounces a year. At $1,200, that is about $9.3 billion, 936 million US dollars a year. If you have to get 5% of that, that's about 46 billion, a million, or 10 billion Guyana dollars in royalty. So they should have been collecting in royalty $10 billion more. $10 billion more. And the economy should have had an injection of close to $1 billion US dollars. In fact, 936 million US dollars. Where is this? Where is this? If they have stopped it. Or maybe they just continue the smuggling. But we were harassed, and up to 2 weeks ago, it's repeated glibly by the media. So that again too was a big issue that we were corrupt with. Now I will give you just a few snippets of what we are faced with. This is something that we did on challenges to the development of the Guyana Marriott project. So let me tell you what was the media environment. And this was every single project that we started, we were faced with the same sort of thing. Whether it was the airport, the Hope Canal, the hospital. So in 2011, 14th of July, Kaichor News, taxpayers' money should not be used to fund Marriott, AFC. I'm not going to call the dates, I'm just going to read the 40 comments at 40 different times in newspapers. AFC eyes, this is the 2nd of February 2012, AFC eyes Parliament review of planned Marriott Hotel. AFC even now more convinced that Marriott Hotel not feasible and taxpayers could be ripped off. APNU will demand that NISIL be brought to books. These are all Kaichor, and most of them are Kaichor and a few Stabroek, right? Marriott Hotel, an inflated project and money laundering machine. Marriott CGIA project should be halted, including CGIA, AFC, APNU. Clear as day, government separating casino from hotel, APNU. AFC's position on Marriott, a defense of special interests. House votes no more tax dollars from Marriott. Opposition passes motion to block funding for Marriott Hotel. And maybe I shouldn't read it. 40 comments, all negative. This is the environment that we had to practice development in. Every single day, unfair headlines, incessant set of lies being peddled by the major dailies and by the cronies in the media houses, some of them. This is just an indicator of what we had to face with the hydro project and with the airport. Now, one would have assumed that since these things were so corrupt, money laundering scheme, the Marriott, that by now, 16 months later, this government would have found out who the money launderers are. Ramjatan spoke about people getting kickbacks. Who the money launderers were, where the money went. For Marriott now, it's almost like none of these things existed. None of this existed. And they're now saying we're going to go ahead with the project. They're having a good time at the Marriott. Very good time. And now they're going to head to the second phase that we had said would be built under the PPP because it's a profitable venture. And someone told me that they can get at least $10 million more for the hotel. $10 million more if they do that. So that's one, the Marriott. What about the project they wanted to have? The airport project. They've just gone ahead. There was no need, they didn't even do an audit. I thought they would do an audit to find out who is the corrupt one, but But let me tell you what really happened. That behind all of this talk about airport, etc., they have secretly done something. After they argued, we inflated the cost, and then said subsequently that we lowered the cost. They have been redesigning the project. They've been redesigning the project. So the price remains the same, but the square footage of the project has decreased significantly. And the media will never press them to say, what's the square footage cost under the PPP and what is it today? What is it today? But it's done secretly and they've gone ahead with it. And the hospital. The same evaluation, PPP evaluation that they said was corrupt, they then wanted to use the same evaluation to give the project to Ramgatan's client. Single source it to him, and the only reason they stopped that was because of the World Bank declaring the company corrupt. They talk a lot about, so I can go on and on about these things. We, one by one, as I said before, we will take them apart on. They talk about friends and family, the friends and family thing. They broadcast legislation. Every time I open the paper, I see Jack gave his friends and family this stuff. So let's look at it. I got a lot of friends and family. One, I'm racist, supposed to be racist. But they don't say that 6 of the 10 licenses were given to non-Indians. So Maxwell Tom and Christy and Alfonso and Rudy Grant are suddenly my friends and family members. All of them are my family members now. And I suspect they're focusing on Ramroop. But Ramroop did not get his license through us. Started a newspaper on his own, bought Vera Telecommunications, so he got the television license through the purchase of Vera station. Vera had a court case about a radio license. The court ruled in favor of Vera, and that's how he got his license. But you hear every single day, friends and family, and of course the PPP got license, and I don't mind that one. So that one, so I'm a politician, so they can accuse me of that one. But the thing is, this is it. You don't hear about that friends and family thing. And we can talk about so many other things, Prado Vale and all of these places. We're going to talk later about them. So today, this is just the beginning. I didn't come here to talk much about what they did. I want to talk about us, their accusations of us. You notice, I don't mention much about what they're doing now. And we have the moral authority, the moral right to do it. No matter what people like the Kaichor News and some of these others, the hustlers. Anyhow, let me get into trouble. I've been saying, they always accuse me of going off track and stuff like that. Today I'm nice. So, we do have the moral right. We said a lot of these things in the past. People didn't listen to us because of the environment. You know, people think the worst of you at that time because they have been fed on a diet of it. We will dismantle all of this. We'll show that the PPP changed Guyana for the good, for most people. We're not saying there wasn't corruption. We're not saying that. If you think we're saying that there was no corruption, we did have corruption, but we made institutional changes. We changed the framework. We never had these kinds of scandals that they had. Imagine the settlement with DDL. And you know what is so bad about their acts? It is not so much the acts are bad by themselves, but they seem to think that they don't have to account or give explanations to anyone. And also the DDL matter. Imagine if we had settled a case that had implications of up to the $80 billion for the Treasury, what people would have said to us? They would have come after us every single day. They would have accused us of corruption. They have done it. They couldn't find $1.7 billion to keep Wales open. Can't find $1.6 billion to keep paying the kids the 10,000 grant. Couldn't find $450 million to keep the old age pension subsidy, water subsidy, and electricity subsidy. But in a single settlement, exposes the Treasury to $80 billion. That's the kind of thing. Or a BK settlement of $1 billion. Or a Rudisa settlement of $2 billion. Easily funneling out money like that. No, but they can't find resources there. They had to take away the jobs from the 2,000 Amerindian youngsters to finance this sort of thing. That's the approach. Thank you.
Have you tried a new taste of Western fried chicken lately? Added flavor, marinated with rich seasonings and fresh ingredients, pressure fried to lock in the taste. Western fried buffalo wings, chicken strips and more. So take a bite into the good stuff today. Three convenient locations to serve you. Call the numbers on your screen for home delivery.
Thank you, Dr. Jagdeo. As I had promised at the beginning of this conversation or discussion, that you will be fed a diet that will allow you clarity, will allow you awareness, and will allow you an understanding of what we are faced with today as against what we faced with yesterday. I now open the floor. This part of the discourse belongs to you, where you get an opportunity to ask any of the panelists questions that are on your mind that may not have been answered in the discourse that took place. Somebody at the back would like to ask a question? Yes, sir.
My first question, first of all, I'd like to thank the PPP party to make this panel available to us, these Guyanese, to come and interact with you. My first question is that why the Acton government reduced the size of the first proposed design of the airport and increased the cost to more than $16 million. The second question, under the PPP government, a young man or a young woman could have owned their very own land that they called their own and build a home and a low interest rate from the bank. Why this government denied them that and build back low G's that the PPP fought against over the years to bring about the proper change of living standards for the Guyanese? Is it David Granger, after drinking the 50-euro rum, strike off the debt for DDL and strike a deal to buy out the shares from Barbies Bridge? Is it was a secret deal, an exchange? And the other question is that how can a president establish a tribunal commission to determine a person standing in a public office, and because the person comes out and announces about the threat to your face, he suddenly strike off him of that position today? Thank you very much.
In the future, right, can we just confine it to one person so we get more people, right? One question per person. And then in case we exhaust it, then we can come back to do a second round. So just one question so we can get as many people as possible getting a chance to speak. You want us to go with it or?
I think there's quite a lot, and we can attempt to answer.
All right, let's hear. We take 5 questions. Yes, there is another comrade there.
When we were in government, every daily culture news are based on the government of corruption. right? Now that they are corrupted, which was false, now that the corruption, we have facts. Take for instance, the bank scandal, the G command, they batched to $300, $1,200 something, $6 million, they 14. Things are so hard with comrades that it is difficult for them to buy everyday paper. I'm asking this party that if they can derive at something that this corruption can be published or bring to life more regular, often. Is not everyone can afford to buy a paper of this government.
Thank you, comrade.
We realize that one of our weaknesses in the party has always been our ability to reach out in a way and to reach people basically and get the message out. So we have a lot of engagements on the ground. But if you go to a village and have a meeting, you meet a limited number of people and you can't do this often enough. So I ask people who are here, there are some media sources that are close to us. Try to subscribe to those, not necessarily pay, and you may be able to get more information. If you're online, it's the iNews. Then the party radio station. We have the Guyana Times, is openly sympathetic to us. The Mirror. These are the newspapers that will tend to carry our views more. And so at least you get an explanation from us on issues, you know our positions. The other media houses, some of them have been open now because they're forced to do it. In the initial period, they almost had something that they would not talk about APNU corruption. Nobody has ever questioned the media, has not questioned the city council about the $800 million that they spent in cleaning up the city without a single tender. They have not asked how they collected their arrears. They're not pushing for the forensic audit of the city council. But you bet it. If it was the PPP, the same media houses will be running us down. So there's still that. And even when they write stories now, they always have a tendency to end it. It couldn't be as bad as under the PPP or as Jagdeo. Bad as Jagdeo. They always end that. This is they don't want to deal with the issues that are so blatant. Many of them are disappointed. So we have to find these media sources. We have to find ways of getting the message out. We suffered from it in government, and we will suffer from it again if we don't fix it. You're absolutely right. But I think people now are more open. The other issues, it's approaches that the government has already made clear. So I already spoke about the DDL matter. I don't know if there is a secret deal. People keep saying to me that it's payback time for people who gave large donations before the elections. So they were promised that when they get into government, they will settle cases in their favor. And they will settle them so massively in their favor that they would be able to recoup the money that they had invested in them and probably leave a bit more for other things, for corrupt practices. There is absolutely no way that you can justify the settlements that have been made. When I met the president, I said, we're going to cooperate on the border issue, that's above politics. The 5 other areas you suggested, let us hold those until you're finished with the witch hunting and with your politicking. When you move beyond that and you recognize that you have to run this country in favor of all of the people, then we'd be prepared to talk. But I made an offer to him that on 7 cases or so, we were prepared to share institutional knowledge. I said, Nandalal will talk to the Attorney General. I never took the advice. It was on the DDL matter. It was on the Rudisa matter. it was on the BK matter, it was on so many others. They did not want the advice because then we would have argued that we gave them the advice and they went against the advice and settled the claims. They did not want the advice, so that's why they killed it. And so there is a motive behind all of these settlements. And nobody goes after it. Look, have you seen any of the newspapers talk about the VDL issue? They just sweep it under the carpet, at least Kaishore or Stabrook. They're not focusing. This is massive, this has to be investigated. Our budget is $230 billion. And a settlement that can have $80 billion implication on the budget, that's unbelievable. Nowhere in the world would you have something like that. And yet nobody pays attention to it. And so yes, it could be linked to the bridge. The owning land, we believe that every Guyanese eventually should own a plot of land and build their own homes. We don't, if people want to live in high rises, that's fine. But the state resources have to be used in a manner that, you know, they're in the executive now. They're in the country. They run the country. So they can choose to build apartment buildings if they want. Our vision is different. We have two different, completely different vision as to how this country will develop. Theirs has been characterized by a slew of taxes, including taxes on poor people. 140 taxes in the last budget. No focus on the productive sector. So there is no focus on wealth creation that will create the value and the jobs of the future. They believe that you can tighten up everything. And also, so people got to pay more. If you bring in a barrel in the past, and yes, 10% of the people used to cheat on the barrel. They used to bring in electronic stuff and things like that. But you don't need to penalize the 90% of poor people who families send a barrel by sorting through every barrel and raising the taxes on the barrel. That's poor people. Or banning used tires. That's poor people again. Or prohibiting people from bringing vehicles that are over 8 years old. They have not looked at who it impacts on. What about those pensioners who were getting a water subsidy all their lives? And you know, they're rewriting history. I saw this Valda Lawrence saying our target for old age pension was $20,000, and in just a short period we're just $1,800 away from it. That's not true. They said in the first 100 days they will double old age pension. That's their lie. And if they were doubling it, it should be close to $30,000. That is the lie. They rewrite history all the time for promises that they're not fulfilling. So our approaches are fundamentally different. We want people to own things, to be able to invest, to get wealthier, to invest your money, own your own home, etc. If a man has a house lot now, even if he doesn't build, but you can demonstrate that this person is poor and he starts owning something. He owns it. If you're going to take it away from him because he can't find the money to build, you condemn him forever into poverty. At least he has a piece of asset. Now you have 10% of the people who cheated, but you can't take away property from all of these poor people because of the 10% who cheated. Sometimes you have to go and do spot checks and, you know, find those people. So if you have another house somewhere in the city and you got a piece of land there, then we'll take it from you. But not the man who working as a carpenter or the guard or the waitress or the domestic servant and who scrape up her money or his money to buy a piece of land, can't afford to build yet. You're going to go after them, harass them, trudge them out in front of the ministry. They got to sit down there. No conscience. No conscience for these people. It's bothering them a lot because this is their hope for a better life. And these people are snatching that away. Different philosophies about how you grow and change. So I don't want to go on too long. I think I dealt with that. Did I miss something else? For the airport, I think I dealt with it. There is something behind this. From you saying in this document that I just read that you should halt this project and that it was corrupt, to now changing the conditions of the project to favor the investor, the contractor, something got to be wrong. What is wrong? You tell me. Because this government would tell no one. That's the difference. A mile fall, again, that's why we asked for a fact-based finding from the Norwegians. You know, we used to hear about Phip Motilal, that Jagdeo gave Phip Motilal the contract. So that was the first thing for the road. We demonstrated, I said to them, you have the evaluation report for the road project. I've urged the government to make it public, because if they make it public, then you will see that that was the best bid, and it was not evaluated by Jagdeo, but by engineers and a financial person, and the recommendation made to us. But what they said, they can't release the report. Harman said they don't have it, and he's lying. Harman is lying. I said to him in Parliament, they have the report, they have all of these reports in a flash drive that Brassington gave them. I read out the contents of the flash drive to the cabinet subcommittee members. Some of them have not even read the documents. They're not even reading it. And they block a project that can make such a big transformative impact on the country that would have brought in some $750 million in investment, added 2 percentage points to GDP, reduced our cost of energy by 50%, because the cost in 2012 at the oil prices at that time was 20 cents per kilowatt hour, 10 cents. But all of this might be to support a corrupt act. So when Jordan said in Parliament, we're generating at 28 cents per kilowatt hour, he was lying, and we pointed this out. Jordan was lying. Can I get some water, please? He was lying because the real cost today is about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. 10, 11 cents, because oil prices have come down. But do you know that Patterson said a couple of weeks ago, they're negotiating with Lloyd Singh for the wind power project. Now, Lloyd Singh is the same man who built the headquarters for AFC. So they're telling us wait on the IDB energy mix study, which has been submitted to them. But long before the energy mix study has come out, the Minister of Finance in the budget announces that we are now negotiating to buy wind power. And we have pointed out the difference between wind power versus hydro, and how that it can't match, it can't become base load. Yeah. And anyone else? Yeah, please.
I know we're highlighting all the corruption that is taking part on behalf of the government that is right now in administration. My question is, what is it that we're doing to address all of these problems when we get back in power in 2019?
All right. Well, that's a good one. Hopefully before. And the thing is that clearly, if the things work the way they did, I think that's why it's so important that we have to separate what was real, and there was real corruption under the PPP too. You're going to see the headlines tomorrow. Jagdeo said real corruption under the PPP. You'll see that. So there was. Shabral, yeah. But 90% of it was perception driven by APNU, very effective, AFC, and by the sympathetic media. And they had an online following that was hostile. That just peddled this. Half of those people who were online and who were the conscience of the society and corruption are deeply ensconced now in the government. they are benefiting from acts of corruption on a daily basis, but they were the conscience of the society and the middle class, and they are online, they were pontificating about this monstrous PPP being corrupt. So they're gone and hiding now or benefiting from them. These Imran Khans and what's the other one? The Roland Johnson, all of them. They're gone underground and or benefiting from the largest of the government. And notice the David Hines too, who they're getting the money from the government now, they're working. So I saw Sam Hines write a wonderful letter outlining how we treated Linden, because they've been pushing about the racism thing, and we didn't treat Linden. And you know what his response was? Read Hines' response. All generalities, a bit disparaging of the Prime Minister, and then he said, in the 1999, I think, the World Bank said youth unemployment in Linden was 40%. And he didn't say what it was in 1992. And then he said there are other sources, not naming them, that said today it's 80%. What are the other sources? They thrive in an environment of propaganda. So Eric Phillips says Afro-Guyanese own 3% of Guyana. But how has he come up with this figure? They said we killed 400 young black men when we were in office. That's what they said. When they made the first attempt to provide that figure, the dossier, we asked, who are they? The first attempt they made, they included the policemen who were killed by the bandits in Buxton and the people who were killed by those bandits too. So ask them, who are the 400 names now? Because they like to peddle that. How did you calculate the 3% asset? And that's why the last time I was here, I said, let's do a comparative analysis, 1992 and 2015, about the state of Afro-Guyanese. If we go on facts, we will get rid of all of these people. They were not going to be so effective. They appeal to a visceral part of people that got visceral. Their appeal is visceral. It's not to the head. But if we have the facts, the visceral appeal does not become effective anymore. And we need to educate people. We need to educate people. And once they're educated, we need to go to Linden and to New Amsterdam and to Queenstown and to South Georgetown and challenge them in those communities to come up with the facts. And like the last time we were here and they talked about Georgetown, how we discriminated against Georgetown. Ras Saul came here. And when I outlined the changes in the city, what we took it, the starting point and where it is today, he had to acknowledge the changes we made because he was making it look like we neglected Georgetown when it's not so. We've transformed the city, not to clean up, but transform the city. And it happened under the PP. But he was making it a racist thing that Afro-Guyanese live mainly here. So these are some of the things we need to talk about, fact-based things.
Superfoods assures the best quality corn and mixed vegetables. Our decade of experience and reliability certainly will help your cooking experience. Our farm fresh corn and mixed vegetables are always picked at prime season and canned to perfection. Once you taste Superfoods corn and mixed vegetables, you will know the difference. Superfoods corn and mixed vegetables, highest quality at the lowest price. Call Superfoods today. Located at 8 Rumfeld Industrial Estate, Georgetown. Call 223-1034 or 223-1035.
I have two persons who asked to make a contribution, Rudolph Sicharan and Radi, and then Annette.
Yeah, let Annette go. Radi.
Radi?
Yes, comrades. Oil and gas production in third world underdeveloped countries is characterized by massive corruption. For example, Nigeria, Gabon, just to name two egregious examples. What is the PPP plus the civic. I'm not seeing too many civics. I hope there's an influx of civics, bright ones. For example, you could bring in somebody like Dr. G.H.K. Lau, to help out. What is the PPP plus civic intending to do in the next few years to educate the 750,000 people in this country about oil and gas production and the corruption associated with this industry?
Thank you.
Well, it's there in the
Oh, you have something on the table, right?
All right, thanks. Annette, please.
All right, so Dr. Jagio, continue with your mentioning campaign funding and the obvious consequences of that for the past several elections. I'm looking forward to what we could do to deal with the inevitable corruption that arises out of campaign funding. So I'm interested to know what you will do and what needs to be done, not only for your party, but any other party, 2020 onwards. And then secondly, when you mentioned about the Auditor General's report, while that was done, I think part of the challenge was the recommendation of the Auditor General not being followed through. And I think as well too that, well, as you said, that is my capture tonight that Dr. Jagio admits there's corruption. I think as well too that there's also an integrity aspect where, I won't say deplorable, but when there was deplorable behavior too, it wasn't dealt with. So I think people like us who are my age, the two are looking forward and looking at hearing what either party would be doing in the future. It's important that we get some clarity on that. And I know you said only one question, but also, what are you doing to extend your base to, persons outside of your traditional base as well? Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me start with the first question, the oil and gas. Again, approaches. And so we heard the first statement of a major nature coming from the government, with Strutman saying, we intend to create a sovereign wealth fund. The People's Progressive Party has that in its manifesto. It campaigned on that promise to create a sovereign wealth fund. And so we intend to ensure that this happens. We intend to ensure this happens. Our primary task today is to criticize the government in a way that hopefully will raise the antenna of private citizens about the potential of abuse of these resources. Not in a way that is unhelpful. So the last time I said about Trotman's statement, I said it was a very dangerous statement when he said, we intend to review the agreement, do a review. And I said, what does a review mean? Are you going to review it with a view of giving more benefits to ExxonMobil? Or are you going to review it to take more from ExxonMobil? Or are you going to review it to make the existing agreement more efficacious, effective, etc.? But when a minister says that, we are very worried given what you have said about corruption and people being induced to sign bad agreements that have harmed the countries that they live in for a long while into the future. And so we are very worried about the government's approach to this. ExxonMobil and the others are huge companies. They have huge legal departments, maybe 500-600 people and stuff like that working in those companies. They're massive companies. You have to ensure that you have the best experience at the table from any part of the world when you're interfacing with them. You have to come to the parliament and say, so people know what you're seeking in the review. This is not like any other sector. It's not about like a rice mill you're establishing in Berbice. This is huge with a multinational interest involved. So we are hoping that that will happen. We are going to also fight for a model of the sovereign wealth fund that is different than that of Trinidad and Tobago, because the government on its own, the executive in those models, can create the conditions through fraudulent forecasting of revenue, etc., to access resources. In some other models, like in Norway, etc., there is a multi-stage process for accessing resources from a sovereign wealth fund. So you have to have independent verification that the conditions are met, and the conditions must be real and objective, and then you have a parliamentary oversight. So the model that we will push for would be that. If we have such a model, and we have clean contracts and it's done transparently, oil can benefit the country in a way that doesn't destroy the other sectors like in many other parts of the world through the Dutch disease syndrome. And so we will pay close attention to that, but it's part of our plan. Campaign financing, the SARA bill. You notice the international community made some recommendations. So what they did with the SARA bill, they expanded this stuff to give Clive Thomas and the others supreme power. They would have even more powers, I think, than the president of Guyana, the person who heads SARA. But they left out any mention of campaign financing. Once there is a proposal on the table for campaign financing, the PPP will seriously consider it. That is our position on this. But we're not going to, but it's not part of the SARA bill, and it's because maybe it can be a separate bill. They're not so anxious to do that, but they're anxious in going after people, political opponents. They don't need anything now to go after political opponents that is not already in our laws. If people have assets illegally, they can charge them now. If they've stashed money abroad, I suggested we go to Interpol and ask for the bank accounts and the assets abroad held by former presidents, members of parliament, etc. It's easy. You can hire a firm to do that. You don't need all of this elaborate system, but they just want to use it for political purposes. But we would seriously consider anything on campaign financing. The recommendation of the audit report, yes, there are many transgressions, because many transgressions were identified even when the Treasury Memorandum was issued as to how they should be fixed. Many of the accounting officers did not fix them. So that happened under the PPP. But a lot of these were administrative type of transgressions at the level of the sub-treasury, the accounting officer, not at the cabinet level, not at the politician level. A lot of it was at those levels. You know, the abuse of somebody stealing the gasoline and they didn't write up the bills and stuff. A lot of that in the Audit General report. You know, the driver keeping the vehicle out, lots of those things. And maybe we are not tough enough on them. But let me tell you other recommendations. For example, the reconciling of these accounts that they talk about, that billions of dollars are left in accounts at the central bank that the PPP never reconciled. The reason we couldn't for many, many years, we did some and where we could find documents, but you cannot close accounts unless they're reconciled, because we are very worried about that, closing accounts with sums. And the problem is that many of these accounts, most of them were from the pre-1992 era. There's no supporting evidence, document, you know, like for the Auditor General to assess in closing these accounts. Now contrast that, they're there now, so you can close the accounts and say, forget about them. But if you had you're following sound accounting practices, you should reconcile before closure. And most of these accounts were pre-1992. You notice they're here. Not that we stole the money from these accounts, but we didn't close them. The other accounts that they said we stole from, the Forestry Commission, GGMC, their Housing Fund, NFMU, the Lotto. You notice big things. These were slush funds for the PPP. They've done audits on all these. What they've found is $30 billion sitting in them. Not anybody stealing the money. They said they will transfer the money immediately. Nandalal spoke to you about the experience. Why doesn't the media urge them to do that? Suddenly they found it efficacious to keep the money outside. It's good macroeconomic practice to keep it there. So if it's good macroeconomic practice now, why wasn't it good macroeconomic practice in the past? Because it is, it adds to money supply, makes money looser, etc. Monetary policy. So why was it that when it was kept outside, it was for the PPP to steal, which they have no evidence of? They have had 16 months and not found a single thing wrong with those accounts that have $30 billion in them. So that's it. When you go through the audit report, you will see a lot of those transgressions, and the transgressions take place at different levels in the government. Those are two. What else?
Traditional days.
Huh?
What is your party doing outside of attracting your traditional?
Tradition. The thing is that it's no secret that the PPP has had predominantly its support from Indo-Guyanese and Amerindians. And I think the main thing is that the racism, they accuse us of racism. But if you examine, that's why I would like a fact-based examination of their policies. We have to do much more in terms of talking to people, getting them to understand, getting them to listen in these communities. The same block that many of you had about the PPP, many people in these communities have about us. Because they've been conditioned to think that this is a coolie man party. That's what they've been told actively through the whisper campaigns, the coolie people party, and it's corrupt. And so they have a mental block to much of what you say. It's that's just an excuse. We have to get past that shield, as we're trying to do here, because so many people just didn't listen to us, even people who supported us. And so you have to get past that shield and fight the stereotype in the communities, because so that when the racist or the inimical to the PPP messages are carried in those communities, that people would say, hold on a minute, I've heard a different explanation. I don't like the people, or I like them, but why don't we contrast the two and wait and see which one makes sense? And I think so. Harder work in those communities, going out, meeting with people, talking, in spite of their instigation to create hostility. So when I went to the vendors, they hated the message. They didn't want us to talk to people because they don't want the message, the alternate message to get to people, because they're afraid of that message and what the party has stood for all these years. Because regardless of what, we've never promoted institutionalized racism, even if there were acts of racism under the PPP. We never promoted institutional racism. And this is what they're doing now. Institutionalizing racism. Institutionalizing it. We never did that, with all of our faults. And our party from Chedi Jagan days be open to people of every religion and every race, and it will remain so. So those are the two. I have, yes. We have a lot of things here about the forensic audits, etc. I got some stuff. But the forensic audits, yeah, but that's a jailing thing. You remember they said they would jail all of us? The usual thing, that the forensic audits were supposed to be to jail us. And so we're saying you have done the audits now. it's time for you to charge people or move on. It's either you charge people, and don't make frivolous excuses, you charge them if you found anything corrupt, because that's the purpose of a forensic audit. Charge him, let's go to the court. I must say that all of you, tomorrow we will not be listening to the President when he addresses the National Assembly. We will go to the Parliament. We will debate the item, the motion on the agenda, the order paper on youth policy, but we will not listen to him. We need to send a signal to this country, PPP supporters as well as ordinary people, that we will not allow the hollowing out of our democracy. Because if we don't stop the initial steps, they're going to grow into an avalanche of activities aimed at denying us our rights. And so, who is safe in Guyana? If a person who has constitutional protection, who's protected in his functioning, in the position he holds, by some entrenched clauses in our Constitution, if he cannot be protected, when they come, as I said before once, when they come after the guy who has the poor home, the poor man, the woman on the street, the vendor, and the waitress, when she has to go and face the brunt of the government, who's going to protect her if they can't respect constitutional offices? And so what we have here is a total abuse of the executive power. The president, in this case, they called this man over, Carvel Duncan, and said to him, you leave the job, resign, and you will get a financial package. Harman said that to him. Then the president said to him, and said, I don't want blood on the carpet. What does that mean? Now this is the president, a holder of a constitutional office, talking to another person who's protected in his functioning by the Constitution. And he is told, you take a package, you resign, because I don't want blood on the carpet. The court case that you have there now, they're accusing, you know what they're accusing Carvel Duncan of? Stealing $100 a month, US dollars. That is his transgression. Stealing $100 US a month in director's fees. That's the allegation. The case is ongoing. Government appoints this tribunal. Contrary, you've heard the explanation, contrary to natural justice and our laws and our Constitution, the right to a fair hearing. Court had not ruled as yet. And then today, that hearing has not been completed by the tribunal, then suspends Carvel Duncan from his post. You then come tomorrow to the Parliament, which is the place where our laws are born, the place where our democracy is protected, and then lecture us on good governance. Dave Carvel just walked in her store. It will be a dereliction of our duty as MPs to sit and listen to another lecture on good governance when the president, the executive cannot respect the holder of a constitutional post and give him a fair hearing in this country. Our worry is not just about Paravel Duncan. It's when they come for you, the ordinary people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, comrades. Apart from him, is there any other persons who would like to ask a question? Please put your hands up so I can identify you. All right, please go ahead.
Madam Moderator, you observed that any government that is corrupt poses a threat to democracy. And Mr. Bishop, I believe you noted that the practices of the current government are corrupt, and suggested also that in its very essence and nature, it is also corrupt. If that is the case, then not only principles are corrupt, not only practices are corrupt, but principles and the very essence of that government is corrupt. That part makes it much more insidious than the practice of corruption. What is the opposition intended to do as far as advancing evidence of corruption? What mechanism does it expect to put in place that would hold the current government responsible for these practices of corruption?
Thank you. Bishop.
I think the first place that we have to make our fight public, and we have been doing that, is at the Parliament. And you would have noticed that we would have taken to the Parliament motion after motion to be debated so that the voices of the people could be properly heard and issues could be ventilated. What we have taken place is that oftentimes when we send our motions to the Parliament, the Speaker spends a considerable amount of time cogitating over it before he makes a determination. It takes forever to get to the order paper. Even when it gets to the order paper and it's an opposition day, they want to change the agenda of the opposition day so that it is never heard. And when it is debated and heard, rather than listening to the views, they use their one-seat majority to gut the intent of the motion, to switch it and to adjust it, and to make it of no effect. So we have to continue there at the Parliament, but forums like these, and using the media, both social media and regular media, to educate the masses, we have to be able to do that. And coming on the back of what Leader of the Opposition just said about the attack on a constitutional office holder, if they could do that to somebody big, could you imagine what happens to somebody who they don't want in a particular place? We have a situation with the town clerk in Linden, where a man who's not even authorized to sign a letter to send her on leave, and the minister refuses to even speak to the issue. So what will happen if you are perceived to be PPP? And finally, since I have the podium, I have a suspicion, having lived in Guyana for 50 years, and that's my age, just over 50. This effect of the crassness of the move against Carville Duncan, it's not just about him being chairman of the Public Service Commission. It's about him being a black man that is supposedly a supporter in their eyes of the PPP. And it's a way of teaching black people a lesson. You support the PPP, this is what we will do with you. And I say that tonight unapologetically. I'm convinced about that. And if any of the black activists wants to take up a debate on this,
then they have to show that they have moral standing. Why were they silent when the tribunal was established and the court case is still ongoing? They've lost their moral standing to speak to this issue when they did not say, Mr. President, you're going too far. Let the court case finish. They were the black activists. But Carville Duncan is the sacrificial lamb for a public display. It could be Edgel next. It could be some other black person who they figure you have deserted the tribe. And that is where the racism exists in Guyana, not in the PPP. That is where the racism exists. There's also another angle because of what Carville prevents them from doing. Because his presence there means that they can pursue this agenda. And the agenda is to remove people and to replace those people with supporters of the APNU, whether they are qualified or not, as we have seen. So he serves as a block to their agenda, the implementation of their agenda. And that's why they're doing it. And the agenda doesn't bode well for the country. You saw the case where the public service, what do they call it? The public service college, staff college. You know, no public advertisement to recruit people. How could you end up where every single staff member is of one race? How could you do that? Where there is no public advertisement. It meant people were handpicked and placed there. And they want to do the same thing, but he stands in the way, in other places. And so it is. And it's not ordinary black who will benefit from this. A few nights ago we had cause to explore this, that people who live in Queenstown or in Region 5 now, the black farmers who are struggling in the rice industry, they have just seen their rental rates for land gone up. They have been told that you're in a sector that the government will not give you any help in. So they will suffer too. So it is for, as it was under Burnham, it was for an elite. Those who can pontificate, don't create value, the Hines and the Phillips and the others and the Clive Thomases. And those are the others. Not ordinary Afro-Guyanese who live and today are struggling across the country like everyone else. Not them. Those are taxi drivers and the shopkeepers and the girls who are the sales girls and everybody else. Or the vendors. Not for them. Not for them, although they may have the right race, but it doesn't matter. They're not elite, so they're not going to benefit. And so we have to analyze that carefully.
Speak, Tandalan, speak!
Just to add one thing to the gentleman's question is that the PPP has always, they did, they are doing, and they will continue to do, that is, to educate, create awareness, and expose all forms of discrimination, victimization, corruption as it's seen. And that means going throughout the length and breadth of Guyana and to create that awareness. Comrade Anu would like to add something to the discussion here.
I just want to add to the question asked by the gentleman, that outside and apart from the avenues outlined, we are also challenging these matters in the court. Carville matter, we filed an action today in which we are seeking to stop the tribunal from proceeding with its work. The bond issue, we have filed an action against that. This lady, our house was taken away. Her sister, look at this person. Single woman, her sister, almost looks like her, and her home, a core home given to her as a single mother under an IDB funded project with the government of Guyana, and this government took it away. Took it away though she has to transport. Call her into the Ministry of the Presidency, she's uneducated, asks to see the documents of title for the place, and takes it. And then goes and put a sign on the house that it is the property of the Ministry of Housing. And that has happened in dozens of instances. Kanji, Perfect Harmony, Tushan, Enterprise, Block CC, Monrepo, right across the coast. We are challenging them all. The opposition leaders spoke about the Region 5 farmers. Their leases for rice lands at MMA, taken from them simply because they were given by President Ramotha. Afro-Guyanese, villages of Seafield and number 4, village on the west coast, the leases just taken away from them. We have those matters.
And given to whom?
And given to PNC activists, party card members, party card holders. That is what qualified them for the lease. We have all those matters in the court. And we will continue to put these matters in the court. So, and also we are preparing documents, institutional racism that we are speaking about, the 1972 Amerindians, and dozens of people who have been dismissed from the public sector, Indo-Guyanese and Afro-Guyanese because of their political persuasion or perceived political persuasion. And we are compiling statistics that we will display internationally and send to international organizations to sensitize them and apprise them of the level of discrimination and witch hunting that is taking place in Guyana. So we are doing a lot. We are doing a lot. And thankfully we have the Caribbean Court of Justice. And we can hopefully go there if the system becomes contaminated. Because you know the system of the dictatorship, they contaminate the judiciary. And that's why Barnum flew the flag of the PNC in the Court of Appeal compound. So we can't be unmindful of these facts. These are our history. And we have to be vigilant that these things don't happen again. All right?
Where is the real?
Comrades, on behalf of the People's Progressive Party, I would like to thank all of you here this afternoon. Without your presence, this discussion could not have been the success that it has been so far. And we are promising you that we are going to continue this discourse at different forums. We will take it across the country and we will make it very big. To the panelists, your experience, your knowledge, and the information you have shared with us this afternoon is invaluable. Something I would like to thank you for on behalf of the audience here. The media are the people who will be taking this information to the general public outside these four walls. Without your contribution, this will not reach the people, and I would like to say a very, very big thank you for your continuous support and looking forward for that in the future. This afternoon, I would like to close because I saw a television newscast and I saw this gentleman, and I'm sure you're Mr. Coachman, are you?
Yeah, that's right.
Please stand up. I saw in the news that he came back. He's a Guyanese. He lived overseas for a while. He came back and he walked from Georgetown right on to Lethem. It took him approximately 3 weeks, and he also promised to walk the length to Region 1. Those of you who would have traveled Guyana would know Guyana is an extremely, extremely beautiful country. Thank you for bringing a little bit of exposure.
We probably need him to campaign with us if he could walk all that distance.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
All the villages
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's a good thought for us to end this evening's proceedings with. Thank you very much, Comrade. Look forward to your presence at the next time discussion.